a typical situation. They call me the cleaner, or the mortician who tries to prepare the funeral. So when something goes wrong, they usually call me, and they call me up because they formed the wrong entity. They don't have a 409A.
Good morning and welcome to Startup.ro. My name is Vlad Andriescu, and today we're going to have a conversation in English for tech startups, for startups that want to expand into the US. It's the second part of a conversation with Tytus Cytowski, which is an American technology lawyer and the founder of Cytowski Partners. He has developed a successful startup law practice focusing on European startups that want to expand into the US, that want to receive a funding round there in the US. And after the first conversation that was about flipping the company into the US, and I will have a link in the description of that conversation, today we're going to talk more about expansion on the US market. Titus, glad to have you here again at Startup.ro.
Thanks for having me, and hello to everyone in Romania and the CEU region.
We actually talked before starting the conversation that you have been at How to Web. You had more than 70 meetings, so the interest is there. Our topic for today is about US expansion for startups. It's a topic that it's important for founders to get a grip and try to understand more. So, first of all, starting very simple, why should a Romanian or Eastern European startup founder watch for the expansion into the US?
Right, that's a great question, and I would say it's the customer stupid. Uh, if you're from a small country in Eastern Europe or in Europe in general, usually you don't have enough customers to successfully grow a company from zero to one and then into hypergrowth. So I think from the get-go, a lot of founders from Romania and Eastern Europe are building companies that are global from day one, and their customers are outside of their home countries. A lot of Romanian founders are not interested in becoming local heroes for Bucharest or Cluj. They want to build companies like Daniel Dinesh did globally with global customers. So I think that's reason number one. Reason number two, I would say, is investors. So, top investors are usually outside of Romania, and it's a lot easier to find them with a company based in the US. And I think reason number three is hypergrowth, and it's a lot easier to enter into hypergrowth with a company based in the US due to the size of the economy and the stickiness of US customers.
So last time we talked about flipping the company. So are there any other ways of expanding into the market? Because flipping the company means basically to set up a US entity, but maybe be here in Romania, have the IP here. What other ways of expansion from a legal point of view are there?
Right. So I would say you can set up a subsidiary in the U.S. in the state of Delaware, and this subsidiary can be used as a proof of concept to figure out your GMT for the U.S. So GMT, go to market for the U.S. and work on and hire your U.S. sales team and or do sales. So forming the subsidiary is an alternative to setting up a subsidiary. And I think that's, the best way to do it. The other way to do it is through a Romanian entity doing business in the US. I've seen it once. It's kind of burdensome and complicated from a tax perspective, and it's a lot easier just to establish a subsidiary of a Romanian company and do a proof of concept for your startup.
How complicated it is to do this, and how involved you should be as the founder?
I would say it's not complicated. Uh, I think a lot of our listeners are, born entrepreneurs and they can pretty much solve any problem and do it yourself. So establishing a company in the US, you can do it yourself through services like Atlas Stripe or Clerky, or you can hire someone like myself to help. Um, and I think, in terms of, timeline, um, from A to Z, I would say it's 72 hours. Uh, so it's pretty quick. You don't need a notary in Romania, or, it's not that complicated. And all of the other things are simpler than I would say in the CE region.
Because you work with startups for this matter of UX expansion, besides the legal part, which, as you said, it can be simple if you do it the right way. What other kind of for you? What kind of other kind of services, connections do you offer for startups? Because okay, you set up a company in the US. What do you do next?
Right. So I would say since the time UiPath was formed, there is a playbook. So there is a playbook from getting from pre-seed, seed up to Series A. Uh, and the playbook means that there is service providers, there's infrastructure that can help people build these businesses, right? So it's not the 90s where you have an uncle who is in the Bay Area and who helps you do this. So in terms of, services that we can help with, or things that are bottlenecks or were bottlenecks. So forming the company was one thing. Topic number two was getting a virtual address. This was, problematic. Now there's service providers for a virtual address, and the reason why you need a virtual address is bottleneck number three, which is, opening a bank account. So you cannot use the registered agent address in Delaware. You need to have a separate one, and it doesn't have to be in Delaware. It can be anywhere in the U.S. And topic number four, which is, always problematic for people, is, hiring. Where do I hire? And if you're, in Cluj, or Yas, or maybe even Bucharest, you don't know who to hire. And now, because there's been so many waves of startups, there's people who can help with, hiring someone, can recommend someone, or can be advisors. So basically, this whole infrastructure that didn't exist, let's say 10 years ago, now is fully in place thanks to, companies like UiPath, Avast, Asset, AVG, Telerik in Bulgaria.
Hmm. What should the founder know after he or she set up the company? Because you mentioned hiring. What should they know about the hiring process in the US? How is it
Right.
different from the one here in the region?
Right. So, reminder, it's the United States of America. It's 50 different legal systems. And if you're a company registered in Delaware, that means you have to apply to do business in each of the 50 states. So you have to be super specific. If you're hiring someone in, let's say, California, you need to apply to do business, you need to submit for payroll, and it takes time. And a lot of startups think, okay, I'm registered and that's enough. And actually, that's incorrect. And sometimes this causes hiring to be more complicated because, you need 2 weeks to onboard someone on the back office side. And this involves also, the accountants in the US, and also your lawyer to prepare the offer letter. And I usually say, you can pretty much recycle any legal document from, your friends, but your employment stuff has to be up to snuff, and you really need to have a lawyer involved on the hiring stuff, and also on the firing side in the US. And unfortunately, there's, magic language that you have to use, and formulaic stuff that have to be in your employment and offer letters.
What is this? What are some examples of the magic language you need to?
Right.
You
So,
need.
for example, I worked with a very successful YC company that offered 1% of the cap table to one of their first hires in the Bay Area. And that was a mistake because, it was supposed to be subject to vesting. The
Mm.
magic words are the company will recommend to the board of the company to grant equity, not, just straight grant. So that was, mistake number one. Mistake number two was, there was no NDA. There was a non-compete clause, which is invalid in the state of California. There was no IP assignment. So it was kind of, or the IP assignment was from the wrong state, not the one from the state of California. So a lot of problematic things, and I think a lot of people want to, a lot of folks from the CE region want to have the look and feel of a California company, and they jump into California, really not thinking it through. And um, California, I love it very much. It's basically the France of employment law in the US. It's very complicated and not friendly to startups.
So it's more on the leftist side
I would
of
not
the.
say it's leftist, rightist. I promise not to talk about
Yeah,
politics, but I would say the more
from an
complicated
economic
side.
point of view. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so when would you recommend? Because last time we talked about starting the process early and in the history of a company. Just to expand on that, when do you recommend the process of starting the company in the US in terms of funding received? I know that you said it's complicated to put a European cap table in the US version of it. So start early.
Yeah, I would say there's no cheat sheet, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's no magic formula. I think uh, it all depends. My most recent client, 11 Labs, which is a voice cloning company that hit unicorn status in 18 months. The founders are from Poland. They set up their company from day one in Delaware. And I see more and more companies from the region that are technology companies, they're starting from day one in the US. So I think if you're a technology company, you're serious, you are going after a global customer, you should think about Delaware from day one. And you see this trend not only with diaspora founders, so basically Romanians who are in the Bay Area or in London. It's already at the very, early stages. Um, People know they can, form a Delaware company from day one. So I would say again, do it from day one. Americans don't want to deal with foreign companies. They want to deal with companies that uh, have the look and feel of an American company. They're okay with, accents and founders who are not originally from the US. So that's, okay, but, they don't want to deal with the hassle of dealing with someone outside of the US.
Before, when we talked about hiring and stock options plans, you mentioned the board of the company, and this should be done before starting to hire. How do you form the board of the company in order to be um, I don't know okay with the US way?
Right. So I think having the board is super important to have the right people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So tested co-founders, people you feel comfortable because all of the power and the company is initially with the board. The board can fire and hire people, so it can remove a co-founder, and a lot of folks from the sea region don't appreciate the responsibilities of being on the board of a company. This means that you have fiduciary duties, and this means you have a duty of loyalty and you have a duty of care, and you also have a duty to increase shareholder value. So not only act in your interest as a director or as a shareholder, it has to be in the interest of all of the shareholders, and it has to be in a way that increases the value of all shareholders. So it's kind of different, right? And I think that's kind of the difference between people being on boards in Europe and being on boards in the U.S. Delaware is very strict about these fiduciary duties, um, and you have to be super careful not to trip on this. And I think another factor, and I think the key factor for founders from Eastern Europe, is that there is something called the business judgment rule, and this business judgment rule protects management and founders from when they make decisions. So basically, there's a presumption that founders have acted in with reasonable care, in good faith, and this doctrine has been developed by judges in Delaware to incentivize management and founders to take risky decisions. So the judges in Delaware don't want to review commercial decisions. And there's no such thing as, like in a lot of places in Europe, like in Germany or even in Romania, where um, founders can be held liable as directors of the company for mismanagement. Um, Delaware law doesn't want to and review mismanagement cases. So that's why there's this presumption of acting with reasonable care and good faith.
So in practice, what does this mean actually for the founders? You mentioned that they can take more riskier decision that they would take in Europe, when maybe where you will think the state will hold me accountable if the company goes bust.
Right. So basically, that's the idea. The idea ingrained in the law in Delaware is to incentivize people to make decisions, right, and be responsible, and not, have the companies in zombie state. So basically, the law wants management to be risk takers, which is kind of a novel concept, taking into consideration how risk averse the corporate law is in Europe.
Yeah, indeed. We set up the company. We maybe hired some people. So the interest is two ways. Maybe to raise investments, or finding clients, having US as your market, because as you said, technology company from the region, they tend to think globally from day one. So what you should take in consideration in this area, from a legal point of view, from the perspective of, I don't know, how to have a contract with an American client, and so on? How is it different from Europe? Some things that founders should know.
Um, so I think one of the reasons founders from the CE region open U.S. bank accounts is because you want to get paid. You built an MVP, you have an amazing product, and you want to get paid, and you want this payment to arrive into your wallet in a very frictionless way. And I think this is a very unique in America that Americans pay with checks, and a lot of founders are surprised. Oh, you know, I just received in my virtual address a check from a customer. What do I do? And this is, a very common scenario. And also, there's Americans have electronic checks, and these electronic checks cannot go to a European company. So that makes payment kind of complicated. Americans also don't use Revolut or Wise. Um, and having them set up a Wise account or Revolut account for a B2B SaaS payment is kind of difficult. So I think one of the major um, stumbling blocks is payments, and that's a reason why to have a US company is to make that payment to the US kind of frictionless, and have it have the customers pay you in dollars into a US account.
And because you mentioned checks, and for those who don't have yet a US company, how do they work for the company, basically?
Come again?
How do they work? How do checks work for the company?
You mean it checks the nationality or?
No, 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 no. The checks, the payment method, basically.
Right. So it's basically, a paper, paper slip,
Yeah.
and you have to sign it, right? Uh, you can scan it with your mobile bank app,
Mm-hmm.
and it's deposited into your account. So that's how it kind of
Yeah,
works. And something totally different, novel than what we have in most places in Europe.
indeed, indeed.
Um,
Um,
and
yeah.
then just one other thing that I would mention that I forgot to say is in the setup of the company, you also need to think about how the IP moves from Romania to the US. So I've seen a couple of situations where um, the founders forgot to license the IP back to the US company, and it was stuck in Romania, and they had a US company, and they were selling IP they did not technically own.
So this should be done in the first steps of when you
It
set up
should
the
be.
company.
Yes, yes. So that's I think we might be discussing mistakes, but I
Yeah.
wanted to highlight this as a situation that you have to think about how the IP is moved to the US.
Have you seen situations regarding IP where in the origin country, let's say, I don't know, Romania, Poland,
Romania.
yeah, the IP was not set up very well? What should you do in this case when you don't have the IP, I don't know, from a legal point of view here in Romania, very well set up?
I'll give you an example without giving names.
Yeah.
Um, so there was a Polish company, and not that I'm trying to point at them, and it was a very successful startup. And IP was a big piece of the puzzle that they had, and IP was crucial for their market. And it turned out that the founder only secured 1% of the IP of of the company, and basically, it was acquired by a publicly listed company, um, from the region, and when they went into due diligence, they discovered that the company has only 1%, and it wasn't because the founder was sloppy. It was because they were using old templates, and the law changed, and the templates weren't updated, or they were updated incorrectly, or there were missing signatures, and um, yeah, so those situations happen, and I was really surprised by this very successful startup that only had 1% of its IP secured,
Um,
and that
yeah,
affected their exit price during the M&A process.
indeed. But um, do you recommend, because you mentioned licensing the IP from the origin country to the US entity, or maybe doing it directly on the US company?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So usually what happens is the Romanian company enters into intra-company licensing agreement or a service agreement where they provide services to the U.S. company, and
Mm-hmm.
in exchange, the U.S. company pays for IP and for the support services, and that's how the IP travels from Romania to the US, and the US company pays for the software engineers and the software development. And usually, um, um, this process is called transfer pricing, and the transfer pricing is based on a benchmarking analysis where you compare companies from the same region, same vertical, and you come up with a pricing structure. And it's usually cost plus 3 to 11%. So most companies from the region accept cost plus 8%, and that's kind of the magic number. So basically, the US company will pay for the cost of development plus a small markup for admin costs involved in the IP licensing.
So we talked about basically starting the company, hiring the employees, about the IP. Um, I would like to talk about contracts. You mentioned
Mm.
payments, contracts. Um, if you saw something maybe different from the traditional service contracts from the region, from Romania, from Poland, and the contracts from the US, things that founders should be aware of.
Right. I think, we all play poker, right? But we shuffle our cards differently, right? So the rules of the game are kind of the same, but they're kind of different styles. So I think, in terms of, the substance, it's the same. Um, you have to be very careful about, as I said, payments, the way IP assignments work. And then, there's what lawyers call the boilerplate. And the
Mm-hmm.
boilerplate is very important. So, for example, boilerplates that can get you in trouble is arbitration somewhere that you don't know, or a choice of law that you don't understand, or a confidentiality provision that you don't understand, or something that's called a merger clause. So basically, a merger clause in the US means that anything that was on email uh, and what you agreed on email but was not in the agreement is excluded. So you have to be careful with U.S. contracts, and they are kind of longer. There's no civil code. Again, there's 50 different legal systems, so
Yeah.
you have to involve a lawyer. And I have clients who are hackers, and who are happy not to use lawyers, but they tell me, we understand the risk that we might get in trouble one day when we do a Series A or a Series B, and someone, looks at, the crazy stuff, we signed without review. Um, so I would say there's a subset of CE founders that don't want to use a lawyer and who take the risk of, signing agreements they do not fully understand.
What are some of the um, crazy things, as you mentioned, or the founders mentioned, that founders signed without understanding, and which were complicated when going to a next funding round or maybe an M&A and so on?
I'll give you the most recent example from a company from our region, close, maybe Romania, maybe not Romania. I cannot, confirm or
Yeah.
deny. But basically, the idea was two founders were the company was VC backed, so there was, a serious regional VC in the cap table. The founders agreed to um, a departure of one of them. They were negotiating in good faith. They agreed to everything. And then one of the departing founder had a lot of the cap table. So he agreed to give the shares back to the company. And basically, on the day he was supposed to sign, he took the money from the company and didn't sign the paperwork, and also went after the customers of the company. Um, and we were in a pickle. And basically, we had a situation of what to do with a non-compliant co-founder who took the money he was negotiated for for exiting the company, but didn't sign the paperwork. So this was, the most craziest thing. And basically, based on U.S. law, we were able to patch together what's called promissory estoppel. So basically, based on the conduct of the parties, the emails exchanged, we were able to create a contract and tell him, well, you didn't sign the paperwork, you took the money, you took what you agreed to, and we clawed back the shares.
Yeah. Um,
So, kind of a crazy story that I have for you from uh, two Balkan founders doing business in the US.
Never a dull moment. Um,
Never a dull indeed.
I know that, and for people who listen to us or are looking at this video, they can find out more. And I recommend, because it was a very good reading also for me, your Medium blog, where you write about these things. And I noticed something there, that you have written, that one of the most common mistakes of non-US startups starting their operation in the US is ignoring the securities law
Mm-hmm.
in the US. And I want you to give us more details about it. And for those who are listening, I will have the link in the description also.
Right. So, securities law, it's a very intricate US law, and it basically the idea behind it is that you cannot sell shares to the public, to unsophisticated investors, and you can only sell shares to accredited investors. So people who have the experience, the knowledge, or the net worth. And if the investor does not meet these criteria, he can ask for his money back. So, for example, if you are taking money from someone in the U.S. and he's not an accredited investor, he can inform the SEC that you violated the Securities Act. So, and you don't want to deal with the Securities Commission, and you don't want to deal with the IRS. Those are two government agencies that you don't want to deal with. So especially if you're a startup, you don't have a Securities Act violation because this is a red flag for investors. And usually sophisticated investors from the Bay Area look at this and their lawyers comb through this to, find this. And a lot of times, founders from the CE region, don't take care of, making sure that they have all accredited investors.
Got it. And it's thank you for explaining this. Um, because we are talking for 30 minutes right now, we are going to go to the end of the conversation, but with some uh, general advice, I would say, for founders. If you were to meet with someone, as you were, I don't know, at How to Web, and a founder would ask, what are the 5 things that I should take into the consideration right now because I want to expand in the US? What should they be? Things that you
Uh,
maybe already mentioned.
Right. I would say big headline, go big or go home. If you're building a technology startup, uh, it should be a real problem of you, real customers. So this is the essence, and the market has to be big. And then I would say go big or go home, solve a real product, a real problem people have. And if you're building a technology company, you have to be ready for hypergrowth. So if it's not growing fast enough, this is not a business that is investable from the perspective of VCs. So if you're not having 10x type growth, you shouldn't, try to, fundraise or go after the U.S. market. So if it's a hobby, then, don't go after the U.S. market. It's going to be a waste of time, and don't go after, Gapminder or Bogdan from Underline, because they're interested in companies that grow in an unnatural way.
A-
Um, yeah.
And because you mentioned Gapminder and Underline Ventures funds set up here in Romania, is there an issue for this kind of funds from the region if I have the company already set up in the US? Because
Uh,
sometimes they have funds from, I don't know, the European Investment Fund, for example, for Gapminder.
Usually it's not a problem, it depends on the vintage of the fund, but most local or regional funds require some sort of, local components. So you have a local
Mm-hmm.
entity or local founders, but usually the entity can be in the US or a US entity with a Romanian subsidiary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. And at the end, for founders that don't know you yet and who didn't work with you, when should they come to you?
I would say you received the term sheet from Gapminder Underline. You got accepted into Y Combinator. You're having problems setting up a US entity, or you screwed something up. And this is, also a typical situation. They call me the cleaner, or the mortician who, tries to, prepare the funeral. So when something goes wrong, they usually call me, and they call me up because they formed the wrong entity, they don't have a 409A, they missed the 83B election in the US, or there's problems with their US employees. So this is usually, when people call me up, and I have to clean out the skeletons before Halloween. And if there are skeletons, we just tell, the investors that, hey, it's Halloween, and This guy is dressed up as Dracula because he's from Romania.
And at the end, because there will be founders who don't know these things, you mentioned some numbers there. Um,
409A.
yeah, please explain them in very shortly.
Okay, so basically, uh, you cannot issue options or equity to employees in the US without a 409A. 409A establishes the fair market value, so it basically protects employees from being taken advantage by the company. You have to get this 409A to issue um, equity to your employees, and this also includes employees in Romania or in Bulgaria. If you're a US company, you need to have this 409A. You just can't, establish the price over a coffee and an eclair in Bucharest. You have to hire someone in the US to do an analysis so the employees pay a fair market price.
Got it. Titus, thank you very much for these details about expanding in the US and also for our conversation into this complicated topic that can become easier with someone like you.
Thank you so much. And, I truly believe that, there's going to be one more or maybe several more unicorns in Bucharest. And I want to be part of it. And I invite everyone to reach out because the road to Silicon Valley leads through Bucharest these days.
Very good way of putting it. Thank you, and thank you everyone for watching or listening. As I mentioned, you will have useful links in the description on YouTube, on startup.ro. If you want to talk with Titus, if you want to do business with him, and if you want to find out more about how to expand into the US market, which is essential for any technology startup from here, from Eastern Europe. My name is Vlad Andriescu. Thank you so much for watching us.
Thank you, Vlad.